You are just one win away, fellas. We are here. It is week 16 fantasy football running back tier list. We have some games kicking off later today, so I'm recording this early Saturday morning to make sure that you guys can get those lineups set. We go through everything over here running back related, from usage to game environments to, who we're starting over who. Everything you guys need to know to set your running back lineups you'll find here. Danny covered the wide receivers yesterday. I also covered some sneaky flex plays yesterday as well, so tons of content available for you guys to help you set your lineups. But without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, so we do have a couple running back injuries to talk about off the top, so we are going to start with the will they play tier. A lot of these guys have actually been ruled out already, but every week I'll try and give you guys the best injury updates I can. Since I'm recording this Saturday morning, I have most of the information I'll need, but anything that changes, I will update in the pinned comments. So a couple guys already ruled out. We have Brian Robinson ruled out already with the hamstring injury he's been dealing with. Antonio Gibson, we imagine, will probably step into most of his starting role. The game split, like I talked about last week, wasn't necessarily what we expected, but they did get blown out, so we'll probably see something a little bit closer. Ramondre Stevenson also been ruled out with the ankle injury. Ezekiel Elliott's going to fill in for him nicely if you have him. Keaton Mitchell, of course, tore his ACL on Sunday Night Football, so he is not going to be back for the rest of the season, and probably not for a bit into next season as well. Gus Edwards going to be the primary beneficiary of that. Alexander Mattison, Zach Moss, and A.J. Dillon all are listed questionable. Mattison is questionable with the ankle injury he's been dealing with. He did not practice on Wednesday, did not practice on Thursday, but was a limited participant on Friday. So he could play, but he looks like he's going to be very risky. A lot of the fantasy doctors are saying probably avoid him and start Ty Chandler instead. Plus, we've already heard the coaching staff say that Ty Chandler will carry the load. As you guys will see in my tier list, I have Ty Chandler rated very highly, but this is in anticipation that I don't think Mattison will play at all. But if he does play, I'll probably move him down a little bit. With Zach Moss, he did not practice all week, so I'm not expecting him to play. Forearm injury has not been officially ruled out yet, but Jonathan Taylor will be back, and I expect him to get a huge workload, 75-80% of the snaps. So good news for those of you guys that were able to advance Jonathan Taylor in best ball, or just advance him into your home league semifinals. With A.J. Dillon, he has been a limited participant all week. My guess is that he'll go. I don't think anybody's starting him, but he does affect Aaron Jones, and he'll probably spell him a little bit more if he is active, and he has been dealing with a thumb injury too, so it's not like he's going to be, limited because it was like a hamstring pull or something like that. But if he's back, he'll probably spell Aaron Jones quite a bit. Now let's get into the actual running back tier list itself. I always go through these locked-in RB starts, my running backs 1 to 12. You guys know to start these players, but as far as who could overperform, who could underperform, I do like to highlight which of these guys have good matchups this week, which of these guys are potentially in high-scoring game environments, which of these guys have bad matchups. You guys can see on the screen there, good matchups: Rachaad White, James Cook, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, and Breece Hall. Some of the guys in high-scoring games include James Cook, Christian McCaffrey, Raheem Mostert, Jahmyr Gibbs, Tony Pollard, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, and Rachaad White again. And then elite running backs who are in bad matchups, so maybe you want to temper expectations for these guys. Of course, Christian McCaffrey is Christian McCaffrey, but he does have a bad matchup against the Ravens. Raheem Mostert, a tough matchup against the Cowboys. Jahmyr Gibbs, tough matchup this week. Tony Pollard, tough matchup this week. And then Saquon Barkley, a tough matchup this week. All of these guys are still in your lineup, but they are going to fluctuate based on whether they have good matchups, high-scoring games, or bad matchups. So I did want to highlight one guy from this top tier because he did break into this top tier after previously never being up here, and that was James Cook. Monster game in Buffalo this past week. I got to see it front and center. He was decimating the Cowboys defense, and they really have featured him since Joe Brady has taken over the play calling. 5 straight games over 14 PPR points, and 4 straight games with an RB1 finish on the week. Peaking, of course, last week with the 36-point performance against the Cowboys. He does have another great matchup against the Chargers this coming week, so really excited about James Cook. He should probably eat tonight on Saturday Night Football. Now let's get into the actual tier list itself. With these guys, I go a little bit more in depth. Talk about their usage and their matchups and all that good stuff. So my running back 13 is Josh Jacobs. He has notoriously been in the top tier of running backs, but he falls just outside this week coming off of the injury. Chiefs are a top 12 run defense as well, so Jacobs should still be a fantasy stud. We know what his workload is. We know how much, groundwork and receiving work he ends up getting. but he did miss this past week with a knee injury, but he does have 11 days to recover. They played on Thursday Night Football in that shellacking against the Los Angeles Chargers. He should be back to his usual 75% snap share. Under 98% of the money is what this game is catching right now, so they're not expecting it to be a super high-scoring game, but we know what Jacobs' workload has been anytime he has been on the field, so I trust him in my lineup. Running back 14 in my rankings is Isaiah Pacheco on the other side of that game. He has missed the last few games with a shoulder issue. He had a cleanup procedure to get that, worked out, and the Chiefs are actually implied for 25 plus points against the Raiders this week on Monday. Prior to his injury, he was well over, 65, 70% of the snaps and commanding a ton of the groundwork. I expect him to get back to relatively his usual workload, so I have no problem firing him right back in there. It looks like they were very patient with Isaiah Pacheco and that injury. So Pacheco is still a top 15 running back for me. Another top 15 running back, and this is, of course, assuming Alexander Mattison is out. I have Ty Chandler here, posted a monster game last week on that Saturday game. Makes you wonder why he wasn't the feature back all season. The usage, you guys can see it there, 80% of the snaps. Basically all of the carries, most of the routes as well, all of that long down and distance and 2-minute drill work. He had a monster top 5 week. The Vikings are facing the Lions defense this week, which is a very solid matchup. Game is in a dome as well, which is conducive to scoring, and the game is a pretty high over-under as well. Crazy having him this high after just one game, but knowing that Mattison is likely out again after not practicing all week until a limited practice on Friday, I would say that Chandler has to be inside your top 15 running backs. And yeah, I would start him over big name guys like the ones I'm going to talk about because he projects so well in this game. But if Mattison plays, I would probably slide him down to the low-end RB2s tier, somewhere in the middle of that one. But as of right now, I don't think Mattison's going to play, and that's why I have Chandler listed here. But if anything changes, I will link any updates down in the pinned comment below. RB16 for me is Joe Mixon. No Jamar Chase this week for the Bengals. I think it's likely that they lean on Joe Mixon, and Mixon was actually the RB5 on the week last time they played the Steelers. He had 21 points. Top 12 matchup sneakily for Joe Mixon as well. You think of the Steelers generally as a very good run defense, a very good defense in general, but they've actually not been very good against the run, especially lately. So gross game total, only 37 points, but we know what Joe Mixon represents from a workload standpoint, from a receiving work standpoint, goal line work standpoint, and without Jamar Chase, like I said, they're probably going to lean on their ground game. So running back 17 in my rankings is DeAndre Swift. The Eagles have not had a big time, fireworks type of offensive performance in a while, and Jalen Hurts has actually struggled recently, but 27.25 implied points per Vegas this week, and an improved workload this past week from DeAndre Swift. He had 41 snaps, he carried the ball 17 times, had 3 targets on Monday Night Football against the Seahawks. This defense is currently 25th ranked against the fantasy running back position with the New York Giants, but DeAndre Swift has yet to perform in some of his other great matchups because it's not like he's been playing against tough defenses the past couple games, and he's really yet to perform. I'm still going back to the well with DeAndre Swift because I think he projects pretty decently this week, but I understand, given his recent performance, if you wanted to move him down because he hasn't really had a good game, honestly, since week 11. So if you wanted to start some of the guys that I'm going to talk about here in a second over DeAndre Swift, I wouldn't blame you, but I do think he projects pretty well, knowing that he saw an uptick in usage last week, and he has a good matchup again this week against the Giants, a matchup that the Eagles have notoriously very much dominated. So running back 18 for me in my rankings closing out this tier is Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. He has a top 8 matchup this week and has had at least 24 opportunities in each of his last 3 games. Bryce Young is actually coming off of his best game as a pro, according to PFF grade, last week as well. I think Chuba Hubbard is a great play in this game against the Green Bay Packers. I would be hard-pressed to keep him outside of my lineup, and like I said with DeAndre Swift, if you wanted to start him over Swift because he's performed a lot better as of late, I wouldn't really blame you for that. So moving on to the next tier of running backs that we have here, we have the low-end RB2s. And this week, more so than any in the last couple weeks that I can remember, there's not a whole lot of a difference between my RB 12 or 13 like Josh Jacobs, and when I get down even to some of these guys later on in this tier, like my RB24, RB25 area, there's not a lot separating these guys. So if you guys notice a micro difference or whatever, an edge that you think you can get, probably go with that. Like, focus on who's at home and who's, implied for more points and who has the better matchups and that kind of thing. Because usage-wise, there's not a whole lot separating these guys. And all of the NFL offenses around the league have been kind of up and down. So it's not like you have dominant offensive running backs here. Running back 19 for me, though, in my rankings is Aaron Jones, finally off of the injury report, which caused me to raise him a little bit. With the knee injury he's been dealing with the last few weeks, the Panthers are 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, and Jordan Love is typically kind of like an up and down quarterback. Some weeks we get him playing really well, some weeks we get him playing a little bit more down. Last week was more of a down week, could be in line for an up week this week against the Carolina Panthers, and Aaron Jones came back last week in week 15 and commanded a pretty solid workload, 13 carries, 4 targets. Of course, A.J. Dillon probably is going to be back for this game, so I don't know how much that's going to factor in. But Aaron Jones is a pretty decent play nonetheless. Running back 24 me in my rankings is Derrick Henry. He's had some pretty low lows this year, so I understand the trepidation with Derrick Henry, but the highs have been there, and they've been there pretty consistently as well. He's had a number of games where he's finishes like a top 15 running back and a couple really big performances where he's able to like punch in 2 touchdowns or whatever. It's about a league average matchup against Seattle this week. Of course, we just saw DeAndre Swift be efficient but not find the end zone against them, but he was tackled on like the 1-yard line, which is usually the case with DeAndre Swift. It doesn't look like we'll have Will Levis for this game, although it looks like he could play. So we have a bit of a quarterback question mark regardless. I don't think it matters all that much because Ryan Tannehill would be a starter on most other NFL teams, especially with all these injuries right now. So with Ryan Tannehill, if he's the starter, Derrick Henry's just fine. If Will Levis, if he's the starter, he's just fine. Regardless, Tennessee has actually been much better at home than they've been on the road. So going against Seattle at home this week is actually a big time deal because Seattle's a hard place to play in, and Derrick Henry and the Titans have been much better at Nissan Stadium. That should be a big-time advantage for them. So Derrick Henry, I actually wanted to put him a little bit higher than this. He should be a very solid play this week. Travis Etienne is my RB21. He has the toughest matchup on the entire slate versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week, potentially without his starting quarterback as well. Trevor Lawrence, who practiced on Friday but hasn't actually cleared the concussion protocol. We don't exactly know if he's going to play. Any updates, of course, I'll post in the comments. Etienne has been fine over the last few weeks, but he hasn't been anything special, and that's been kind of a problem if you've been starting Etienne because, of course, he's a big-name guy. He was really productive at the beginning of the year, so the fact that he hasn't given you, a 20-point performance or a 25-point performance since really like week 7 or week 8, we need to see one of those big performances out of Travis Etienne. Hopefully he can find the end zone. Maybe he can catch some more passes this week. If Trevor Lawrence ends up being out, I think they will lean on him more, but of course the Buccaneers will key in to try and stop the run. So with Travis Etienne, he's kind of a risky play this week, especially if Lawrence does not play. Hopefully, if you guys have Etienne, as I do in one league, you definitely want Trevor Lawrence out there. So running back 22 in my rankings this week is Austin Eckler. Eckler honestly might even be still a little bit too high because he has not performed at a high level this year. My thought process, though, is that the Bills are the 20th ranked team against fantasy running backs and adjusted fantasy points allowed. They have also allowed the 6th most targets to running backs this year, so obviously that plays in very well with what Austin Eckler does. So even if Eckler is useless on the ground, he goes like 13 for like 26 like he's done so many times this year, he might still get there on the back of like 6 to 10 targets. So even though the Bills are expected to blow the Chargers out, they're like 13-point favorites, I still like Eckler as a guy that can get there based on the target share. So I do believe, plus it's in Los Angeles as well, it's not a road game for them. I do think that Austin Eckler is just fine this week as a low-end RB2 play, which is something I've never said about Austin Eckler because anytime he's been on the field, he's been an RB1. So running back 23 in my rankings here is Kenneth Walker. He had a bit of an injury scare this week because he hadn't practiced Wednesday, didn't practice on Thursday. He's been dealing with a shoulder issue, but we have heard from head coach Pete Carroll that both he and Geno Smith are going to be good to go this week, and that's kind of big news, obviously, for the whole offense because Geno is better than Drew Lock. The Titans are 19th against fantasy running backs as well, and Kenneth Walker performed really well last week against a really tough matchup in the Philadelphia Eagles. So I am firing up Kenneth Walker despite the injury alert as a top 24 running back, and you should as well. Running back 24 for me in my rankings is Devon Achane, and like I said, Achane is RB24 for me, but I think you could make the argument if he's healthy and he's 100% good to go, that he could be, RB14 in my rankings. That's just how close these running back decisions are. So again, go with your gut, go with what you believe to be true. Achane has been also dealing with a turf toe injury, which is why I have him a little bit lower than maybe a lot of other people would have him. He should be in a great spot for fantasy if he's 100% healthy, especially with the Cowboys' run defense fresh off of a shellacking from James Cook last week. It's a 50-point over-under. The Dolphins are implied for 26 of those points per Vegas. I'm still ranking Achane relatively conservatively right now because he's questionable coming into the game, but I feel pretty confident still firing him up if he's good to go and he's not on a pitch count or anything. If anything changes health-wise, I'll update that in the pinned comment. But for now, I think if you have Achane, it would suck to sit him. And if he has like one of those 30-point performances like we've seen from him this year, I mean, he's had like 4 games over 25 points. It's really hard to keep Achane out of your lineup. But if he is, coming into the game on a pitch count, really questionable game time decision, you have to rank him a little bit lower than this. So running back 25 for me is Devin Singletary, kicking off the flex plays tier. Monster performance last week, 31 opportunities without CJ Stroud. They just completely relied on the run and leaned on Devin Singletary. It appears they'll be without CJ Stroud again. I think he's officially been ruled out, and another run-heavy game script should be in order. The Browns defense, obviously very scary for the pass, but it's actually been about league average against the run over the last 5 weeks, and they actually have invited the run quite a bit too. So when you look at like pass rate over expected against opposing defenses, the Browns are like 4th lowest in that. So what that means basically is most NFL teams are running the ball against Cleveland because they know how good their pass defense is. Devin Singletary will need to be effective because I'm sure Cleveland knows that's all they're going to do without CJ Stroud. But if Devin Singletary can get there from an efficiency standpoint, he's going to be great because the workload has been there for him. He's been the hot hand in that backfield between him and Dameon Pierce. So I'm pretty excited about Devin Singletary this week as a solid flex play. Running back 26 for me in my rankings is Javonte Williams, who I talked about on the Sneaky Starts video a couple days ago, basically averaging 21.67 carries a game in the 6 games since he's been back from injury that the Denver Broncos have won. So Denver is favored by nearly a touchdown against New England at home. That's over 25 opportunities per game because he's also getting 4 targets on top of that. In the games that they've basically been leading and games that they've been ahead in, the Patriots defense has been pretty stingy against the run, but I do like Javonte to get home this week just based on volume basically and target share. So he is a pretty decent play given the game environment. Running back 27 for me, and you could definitely argue I have this guy too low, is Ezekiel Elliott. It's the same game. It's just the other side of the ball. Zeke is a great option this week with Ramondre Stevenson on the mend yet again. The Broncos are the 5th easiest matchup against fantasy running backs and are fresh off of a dismantling from Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. They got destroyed in that game. Zeke is a full-fledged bell cow without Ramondre Stevenson in the lineup. If it weren't for my hesitance on this offense, the fact that they're playing on the road in Denver, I don't really trust Bailey Zappi. I think that it's possible that the Patriots score 3 points in this game. I also think it's possible, though, that Zeke carries this offense and it doesn't matter about the low game total. He's just going to be a workhorse. If it wasn't for those 2 factors, the low game total, the fact that they're on the road, and the fact that it's a Bailey Zappi-led offense, I would probably have Ezekiel Elliott way higher than this. He is a safe play because of the volume, but I'm concerned with the ceiling there given the matchup and the fact that they're on the road. Running back 28 for me is James Conner. He's gotten back on track the last 2 games that he's played. Tough opponent this week. The Bears have actually been one of the best defenses in the league, bar none, over the last 2 months or so since acquiring Montez Sweat. They've been one of the best DVOA defenses in the NFL. Conner is mainly a touchdown or bust volume play, similar to his projection last week against the San Francisco 49ers, but he did get there last week, and he was a top 11 running back in points per game on the week. So James Conner, pretty decent play this week, but not an every week starter necessarily. Running back 29 for me is David Montgomery. The Vikings are a stingy matchup against the run and against the pass. The Lions are a good enough offense to run against anybody, though, and I don't anticipate a field day for their offense necessarily because the Vikings are pretty strong on defense. This will be a close divisional game, and when that is the game environment, usually David Montgomery is in play. He's a fine RB3 flex play with a good floor. The touchdown luck hasn't really broken his way recently. We've seen a lot more of Jahmyr Gibbs. It appears he's kind of taken that job and run with it, but nonetheless, I think both of these guys are still in startable range because we know the Lions rely on both of them to keep their offense moving. Running back 30 for me in my rankings, closing out these flex plays here, is Gus Edwards. Keaton Mitchell is out for the year, like I said earlier. Gus Edwards is back installed as the primary starter. Especially in red zone situations, we know he can punch in 2 touchdowns on any given week. It's crazy to me that I have Gus Edwards at 30, but I still really like him this week. The 49ers are a top 12 run defense. We kind of know this about them, and they're also pretty sizable favorites at home, so it's possible that it's not a game script for Gus Edwards, and Justice Hill works in more as a result. But if the Ravens can keep this one close, I mean, they're both the number one seed in their respective conferences, I could foresee a decent day out of Edwards and potentially a blow-up spot here if he can punch in a couple touchdowns. So he is a very good option this week with a high ceiling, but a little bit volatile given the game script. Deep league flex plays, these are, if you guys are, still searching for running back plays outside of the ones I talked about already, running back 31 for me is Roschon Johnson. Absolutely nutted run defense matchup. Of course, we've seen what the Christian McCaffrey and Kyron Williams managers have gotten out of running backs going up against the Cardinals. 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed. The reason I actually trust Roschon Johnson this week is because he outsnapped Khalil Herbert and Deontay Foreman combined last week. And before the bye, we saw him spike in usage as well. In my opinion, it looks like this could be the game where he takes over this backfield, and this could be the breakout game for him. It's whoever gets the hot hand in this game is going to perform, because the Cardinals are horrible against the run. And given that Roschon is recently the guy that has spiked in usage, and I think he's the best back in this backfield, I do expect him to potentially have his breakout game this week. So if you want a good DFS tournament play, I think Roschon is your guy. Running back 32, Jerome Ford, after weeks of consistent RB2 production, the Bears defense really stifled Jerome Ford, but the Texans are a below average run defense. So with Jerome Ford, you're getting his usual 15 to 20 touches per week. But he is my RB32 in my rankings. Still a pretty solid bet for production, but not the type of dude that you absolutely have to start. Running back 33 is Jaylen Warren. He's been volatile this year, but he did have a monster game against Cincinnati the first time they played. 24 PPR points, was actually a top 2 running back on the week that week. Firing him back up if you guys need a good flex play against a run defense that's about average. I think Jaylen Warren's a good option. Running back 34 for me is Antonio Gibson. No Brian Robinson in this game. In a blowout-less game script this week, they played against the 49ers, obviously, last week. They got absolutely boat raced. This week against the Jets should be a lot closer. Should be a half-decent spot for Gibson to get home. And the Jets defense, similar to the Browns defense, is one that invites a lot of rushing opportunity. So Antonio Gibson could be a decent play, but play him with some caution because Chris Rodriguez and even Jonathan Williams were actually involved in this backfield last week. And then closing out this final tier, we have Chase Brown at RB35, Najee Harris at RB36. Najee, you kind of know the deal with. He's the same projection as Jaylen Warren, only gets different kind of workload. With Chase Brown, he is uber efficient, hoping he can continue to carve out some touches in this backfield. He's had 11 opportunities for 2 games in a row. And honestly, I think he needs like 15 to 20 per game because he's so efficient on his opportunities. And what he brings for this offense is explosiveness, which without Jamar Chase, they're going to be missing this week. So I think Chase Brown could be a bigger part of this game plan. So I kind of like him as like a low-end desperation flex play if you guys need somebody to put out there. So if you guys enjoyed this video, if I gave you some value, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Check out the site, Flock Fantasy, big Dynasty rankings update coming this week, as well as, a number of other things. We got the top 5 pass catcher rankings so far in the 2024 draft, so we go in depth on Marvin Harrison, on Malik Neighbors, on Brock Bowers, etc. We went in depth on those players in this week's bonus video, so if you want to sign up over on Flock Fantasy, you get a bonus video every single week. Next week, we will go through pass catchers 6 to 10, and then the week after, we'll be going through running backs, getting an early look so you guys can get ahead of your league mates, ahead of the NFL Combine and the Senior Bowl and all these post NFL season events that we're going to see. So if that interests you, check that down below in the description. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.